Right, simulation theory. It's something that's been mentioned a lot in the arena of theoretical physicists and thinkers, just thought experiments, and you get the glitch in the matrix theory where Neo does deja vu when the cat walks by, and then exactly the same cat walks by in the same demeanor and the same movements. And he goes, oh, deja vu. Real deja vu, it's a mind trick, and people who are more expert in that area of uh, looking at things through that lens, the psychological lens, or the tricks that the brain does, explain in detail what the brain's doing there. And I think, in the same way in which, if simulation theory gets among those who are trying to look for proof of it, I think they were just self-convinced. They were. It's been said we're like 50 years away from proving whether this is a simulation or not. And I think if they conclude, yes, this is a simulation, I would say boldly, perhaps, that they're still wrong. Because the brain simulates reality anyway. And of course, we have technological advances that can measure reality in ways in which our senses cannot. But we're still reading the results via our senses of those uh, the equipment. We can't see infrared light. We can't see ultraviolet light. Bees can, because they navigate with ultraviolet light, because bouncing off a flower, the most reflective ones will reflect enough of that light so the bee can see where its food is, right? Honeybee, right? And you get your pollination going. This is an evolutionary problem more than it is a reality problem. Of course, different biological systems evolved in a way that was most important for them to find food in order to use that sustenance in order to survive. While other senses may have just been there for that in some ways. We have cases where people have colors in their dreams that we don't have a name for. They say, oh, it was like red or green, but I can't explain it. They perceive this in their dreams. Well, through evolutionary process, our eyes evolved in different ways, right? And maybe at one time, some neural brain connections processed light coming through our eyes that had different types of eyes that would allow certain combinations of light, color to come through, and kind of butchering the explanation there. But our brains maybe process that, and we did see those colors. This is before we even evolved language, even before we were anything like a primate. But this could be evolutionary leftovers. There's definitely a lot of evolutionary leftovers in biology, in mammals particularly, and other creatures. What I mean by leftovers, we still have appendix, and people have appendicitis, and you can have that taken out. It's been said that we don't really need the appendix. Um, but they're evolutionary leftovers of things that have been diminished over time because evolution is not needed it. The more we need something, the more it's going to be more prominent and stronger and developed, right? And so we needed larger brains to cope with the more complexities of how we was uh, living our lives, and which aided more complexity again in a feedback loop, because coming up with different ideas, and there's many different theories on what caused our brains to develop exponentially through our evolution. There seems to be a big uptick, um, but along our evolution here and there, it's and what it's always a feedback loop between things. Like the opposable thumb, is definitely a thing. You can, with your thumb, you can touch the tip of your pinky finger, and then the next finger, and the next finger, and the index finger. Um, that allowed a lot of flexibility to handle objects that other creatures don't have, which allowed a evolution of ideas of what we can do with the objects, which allowed better flexibility with our limbs in evolutionary standpoint, because the more we did certain things in certain ways, the more that got bred into the system, natural selection. And natural selection dictated that we have these three primary colors that we perceive, and all its perception. And sure, we develop technologies that outdo or add to perhaps our perception, our biological perception, and a lot of mathematical prowess used in physics and explaining the universe. Uh, the mathematical pi is proven many times to be very accurate with certain predictions here and there, and aspects of the universe. Uh, Einstein's theories talked about black holes before we even had any technology to sense it. So, sure, we have uh, theoretical ability to outdo our senses, and then add the theory into science and technology to then prove different theories. But how about, rather than simulation theory, um, perception of reality being a reflection of how we can measure it, rather than seeing, the saying is a simulation underneath another. I think that's a better way to look at it, because many aspects of reality cause other aspects of reality that we're not biologically predisposed to perceive. And it's also, you know, through our technological prowess, we keep finding aspects of reality through these measuring systems that keep showing different aspects that we didn't perceive or able to detect prior to that technology, to prove why certain things are a certain way. I think it just boils down to understanding the bigger picture. And sure, it's vast, it's complicated, and um, so I don't know what other people think, but I think simulation theory, a conclusion that this is a simulation, will be a mind trick, just like deja vu, because there's always going to be an underlying effect that we perceive that seems like a dead end. There's no reason for it to be in there. And then somehow, with our technologies, we end up with something, in our measurements and our math, we end up with something that says, hey, it's no longer a mystery. Here's why this happens. Rather than saying, oh, this comes out of nowhere. So, current day quantum mechanics is quantum mechanics is a thing, and quantum theory and quantum physics, they're all three different categories to do with the quantum size of things. And like the Casimir experiment, for instance, Casimir I forget when the experiment was done. It was theorized many years until they waited till they got the technology to do the experiment, and nobody expected to find, for all intents and purposes, infinite energy in a vacuum. But that's what the Casimir experiment claimed to have found. I kid you not. They thought there would be like residual, like just bits in a vacuum. But they milled these plates microns apart, these tiny plates, which slammed together on their own in a vacuum because there was less room between them than there was around them for residual, what they was measuring this residual energy. But there was so much energy and it's pushed these plates together, and the calculation would be formally infinite if not for what they said was like renormalization to cut the number, which is fine. I think it's you need infinity is a problem because you don't want to count forever, because all you're doing is not research. Then you're just counting, and that's why you end up with different infinities, right? Here and there, one of the reasons, I guess. It's a problem of perception, I think, in terms of, is this a simulation? Sure, it seems that way many times. Glitches, mental mind tricks, and that feeling of, oh, we've been here before, but that's the brain playing tricks. Not tricks necessarily, but it's tricking us into thinking that people who think more spiritual, like perhaps they've been here before, or whatever, from another time, or whatever, and if it is a simulation, what's that do? I mean, it doesn't prove any or disprove. It seems to me like a pointless exercise. The importance being focused on, it seems like apparently so important that we need to find out whether it's a simulation. But then, if it's proven or by, and again, I don't, as an idiot, as a layman, I don't see how it can be proven. But those who are looking for it, let's say they become convinced. And then what? Which you've got to ask, which one are we? Are we simulation 2 or 1 from the whatever? What number are we down the line? Sure, we got systems that are real world modeling, and you put all this math and calculations into supercomputers and they run simulations. However, they're nothing remotely close to what we know through our biological system as reality. But they come close with individual modeling on the physics of things, right? But the actual look and feel is completely different. But they give you the good enough math to say, hey, here's a prediction of what this would be if you did this in the reality you're already in. But you didn't know prior to this being worked out by a computer, because it's a perception and measurement, an equipment measuring problem, rather than, oh, there's another alternative reality running this reality. Simulation theory, I think, is bunk. Yeah, that's my very biased take on it, because I hope people can understand my thought process there. It's very difficult for me to articulate that, but that's typical of like nuanced things to talk about, perhaps sometimes with Exploratory Minds project, like I did before, plus much more grounded things to talk about. I know some people out there who are incredibly dysfunctional. I'm thinking of, will look at this here and I, what the hell is he talking about? And I think that anyway, when I'm talking something far more grounded, just think, I don't know what triggered me to think of them, but I guess in the previous video I talked about a certain one that has a THC addiction, definitely, who kept repeating the word that 6 times. They got stuck on that. The actual word that, and could not stop. They kept trying to move and flow to the next. But it didn't work, so the brain repeated that again and again. 6 times to be exact. The people who that it was something like that. Crazy. But then again, that individual has many perception problems because they're always high. And yeah, they're high on THC and their brain is adult. They've obviously started smoking this way too young for the brain still developing. And now they're something like 47 years old. And they're very immature. They're underdeveloped and aggressive and vitriolic, hateful, and racist. And that's a big problem. What their reality is, well, yeah, there's an entirely different reality there. So subjectively, but not objectively. But again, perception, and how we measure our reality, and the ideas how we can change our technology to measure different things is the key to understanding the universe we're in. Before we consider, this is a simulation, it's very much like, are we at the center of all of the simulations out there? Are these layered simulation within simulation? And then, the next simulation that would be in the center again would be one that we create. Kind of like before our technological prowess allowed it, we all thought like we are the center of the universe. Yeah. And that the sun went round Earth rather than the Earth going round the sun. I think it's very much that way inclined. We keep doing this with a lot of things, and I don't buy simulation theory. I think it's a trick of perception, definitely, and our technological prowess that is limited for now, but keeps expanding and progressing to detecting different things here and there. Even things that we're detecting now that we only theorize could be. And then we discovered them because the math and everything was pretty on the point. And math is always seems to prove very objectively that many things in the universe can be measurable. Although quantum mechanics has this problem with measuring the observer effect and so on. Cheers. Thanks for listening. What do you think? Is it a simulation or is it just one reality? Cheers. Bye.